Good evening and welcome to the town board meeting of Tuesday, January 14th. I'll start with the supervisors report and some announcements. So first I wanted to talk a little bit about the form-based code, which is a subject that we just came from the downtown working group meeting and we're discussing there. So in my supervisor's report last week, I discussed the town's project to create a form-based code for the Chappaqua Hamlet. A traditional zoning code regulates land use by dictating where certain uses can occur, for example, business, residential, industrial, etc. By comparison, a form-based code attempts to look holistically at how zoning relates to infrastructure, parking, open space, design, architecture, etc., and focuses more on the form of the building as opposed to mandating its use. We believe that this is a truly exciting way to plan for the future of our beloved downtown. Working with the members of the downtown working group, the town board is charged with creating a form-based code that reflects the goals of the town's 2017 comprehensive plan, which is to preserve the town's bucolic residential character and its historic resources while promoting new mixed-use development in the hamlets to meet the community's housing needs and foster thriving commercial and civic spaces. So as I mentioned earlier tonight, the Downtown Working Group convened to discuss the most recent draft of the code, and you can find this draft form-based code as well as other project documents and all of the videos from our previous public meetings online at plannewcastle.us/rezoning. Now tonight at our town board meeting, we'll be voting on a resolution to take the following next steps. First, the town board will declare itself to be the lead agency with regard to the State Environmental Quality Review, or SEQR, process. Second, we will review an environmental assessment form that has been prepared by our consultants who are here tonight, Kimley Horn, and the town board will issue a positive declaration finding that there are potentially significant impacts resulting from the project which warrant a full environmental assessment. And third, we will set the date for the public scoping session for that EIS, which we are proposing will be January 28th. I just want to stress that we are at the beginning of the public engagement process that is required for the SEQR process. We are taking these steps here tonight in order to move forward with the environmental analysis that will attempt to answer some of the questions that have been raised. For example, how will increased density impact traffic and parking? How will the building heights that have been proposed in the draft code impact the character of the hamlet? Ultimately, the EIS will give the town board, acting as the lead agency, the information that we need to determine the merits of this project and whether to move forward. To help residents further understand this and how they can get involved in this process, in tomorrow's e-newsletter, I will be publishing some frequently asked questions to help answer what the public's role is in the SEQR process and in the scoping process that we're kicking off here tonight. Okay, moving on to other announcements. So I just wanted to make an announcement regarding our newest Eagle Scout in the town of Newcastle, David Kessler. So on Sunday, January 12th, there was a ceremony that was held at the Newcastle Community Center. Horace Greeley High School junior David Kessler was awarded the rank of Eagle Scout in BSA Scouts. He's a part of a proud tradition of Scouts that we have here in town who've served our community and our nation in ways big and small. David's Eagle Scout project was to design and construct a shed at the First Congregational Church, which is where the Play Care Nursery School is housed, and he has made a significant difference and improved that space there. So I had the honor of attending on Sunday and presenting David with a proclamation on behalf of the town of Newcastle and our community. And David, we're all very proud of you, and you really represent the best of our community. I also wanted to provide an update for everyone on the Catskill Aqueduct shutdown. So on December 11th of last year, the town switched its water source temporarily from the Catskill Aqueduct to the New Croton Reservoir due to a scheduled shutdown of the Catskill Aqueduct by the New York City Department of Environmental Protection to allow DEP to make necessary repairs to the aqueduct. Due to the change in the water source, some residents have noted a change in the taste and the smell of their water. Please rest assured that the water is tested and treated at the Millwood Water Treatment Plant and that it greatly exceeds all New York State DOH and EPA water quality standards. The town has last week reached out to DEP and reconfirmed their plan to open the Catskill Aqueduct in late January, at which time our water source will return to the Catskill Aqueduct. But please keep in mind we are dependent on the DEP for that switch, and that it will take several days for the water to cycle back through the pipes and the tanks. So you can learn more about this on our website. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that we invite everyone to join us on Wednesday, January 22nd, for the Faa Noise Forum that's being sponsored by Westchester County and will be held here in Newcastle at the Community Center at 10 Center Street at 6 p.m. This is an opportunity for everyone to be heard and to help to resolve the impacts of Westchester County Airport on our community. Thank you. Now for Jill Shapiro with the Administrator's Report.
Thank you. DPW will be on site tomorrow, Wednesday the 15th, to repair a minor water leak on Quaker Road between Suzanne and Hardscrabble Road from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. There will be one lane of traffic open at all time. If there is any impact to surrounding homeowners insofar as their water, crews on site will actually knock on doors and inform people. They're not sure that they're going to have to shut off anyone's water to be able to do the repair, but they're not going to know until they actually open up the road. The police will be on site, but we just did want to make everybody aware that it is going to impact traffic, and so please expect delays and just leave a little bit earlier to make sure you get where you're going on time. Last Wednesday, we had our first construction meeting on the construction of the basketball court and inclusive playground behind Town Hall. The contractors are on schedule. They're projecting a June 2020 completion date. The site work for the playground has actually been completed. Drainage work and site work for the basketball court is continuing. And the work will stop at some point shortly because the asphalt plants are closed for the winter. And when they reopen in April, they'll be able to resume. But they've actually been moving along really well. The weather's been very kind to them so far, and so they've got a lot done, and we're very excited to see this finished. Second half school taxes are due on Friday, January 31st. If you, as opposed to your bank, are responsible to pay taxes, January 31st, that Friday, is the last day to pay the second half tax bill without penalty, and our tax office is open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on that last day. The tax office actually holds post-dated checks, so you don't have to wait to the last minute. And we also have an online payment system, ACH, there's no fee. If you're paying by credit card, it's 3%. And if you've got any questions, you should call the tax office at 238-4773. And just a reminder that we do have some summer internships available. If you're a Newcastle resident with 1 year of college completed by the summer of 2020, we've got paid internships in the development department, engineering, DPW, water department, if you want to be outside, painting hydrants, $15 an hour, can't beat it. Also, if you have an interest in engineering, we've got 2 internships, paid internships at the Millwood Water Treatment Plant. Any emails of interest should be to my attention at jshapiro@mynewcastle.org. Thanks.
Do we have anyone who's here for public comment? Mr. Weinberg.
Mike Weinberg, Chappaqua. I'm also a member of the Millwood Chappaqua Chamber of Commerce on the board there, but I'm speaking only for myself. So first, welcome and Happy New Year to everyone and our new board members. That's great. Good luck. So I actually think this form-based code process is great, and certainly we have to learn more and get into the details. But I'm thinking about it from the retail perspective and the perspective of downtown. So I had a few questions, and I don't know if it's the form-based code or the zoning. So pardon me if I'm a little off base here, but trying to get to the concept. Sorry, I forgot my reading glasses, so I'm having a hard time reading my notes. So is there a way to have a percentage of, say, restaurants and say 10% of the space has to be, again, I'm throwing out numbers, it doesn't matter, but to say 10% of the spaces on the first floor must be restaurant, or to say 80% of them have to be retail versus service. I know we talked in there about service a retail space, but I wasn't sure if retail includes service or retail is separate from service. Is a bank retail or is a bank service? You know, is a nail salon service or retail? Because I think my concern from that perspective is that we want to have enough retail and enough things that we don't all end up with real estate agencies and nail salons and banks, finance companies. I know in some cities, they actually mandate that a certain percentage of a block or a neighborhood stays open till a certain time of day, forcing it to be more retail. Again, I'm just throwing out ideas.
I think Nick is best to answer that question.
Well, so that's one of the questions the board had asked me during the work session, is to look into the ability of the board to regulate the types and uses of occupancy. So we're gonna look into that and get back to the board.
Okay. And the other piece that I was interested and concerned about is if we could regulate installation and passive heat and lack of climate, lack of natural gas and oil and things of that nature to kind of force developers' hands to start to make us more climate resilient, or whatever term of art we'd like to use, but to focus that any new code has to be meant to, with a lot more insulation and a lot less energy use, and mandate that piece.
So that's actually something that I'm personally very interested in. However, that's more of a building code issue as opposed to a zoning issue.
Correct.
Okay.
And there are limitations
But-
on what a municipality can and can't do because there's a state code. And so that's something that will be looked at, I think, as
Right,
part of.
and we have the advantage now that you can't even get a new gas hookup, which in my nature, for especially the size buildings, I think is a great thing. So the more we could do to limit that gas usage, oil usage, I think is a positive thing. Those are my comments.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Me.
Okay. So many of them at the last meeting, and yet you were the only one to stay to provide public comment. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a resolution that's been drafted for us regarding having the town board step forward as the lead agency. Before we do that, I know we have Bonnie Von Olson here with us from Kimley Horn. How did the two of you want to work walking us through the environmental assessment form? Great.
Bring more copies, even though you have these electronically.
We
Sabrina-
actually, we have the form in our packet. Yeah.
These are slightly updated on this one.
Let me
I
give them
think
to
box is
you.
checked on these.
This afternoon, the EAF Part 1 is completely the same, but this afternoon Nick and Sabrina and I spoke, and there's very few minor changes on the Part 2. So we updated the date to today's date on that one.
Thank you.
So as I said in the work session, and as reflected in your draft resolution, there are three parts here. The environmental assessment form, part 1, is about 13 pages long. It has a proposed action, the contact information, so forth on the first page. And then what's unique about this one, in this case, is since it's the adoption of the local law, when you get to page 2, section C, planning and zoning, C1, if yes, because the only action is the adoption of the local law, you can check the box yes, and then basically you skipping to the end, because all of the rest of this is very site-specific construction kind of questions. So even though you will be addressing those, because the action is the law and the zoning code, however, in order to analyze the impacts, you have to do some sort of a build-out, which you know we've discussed, and we'll be putting forth in the impact statement. For those terms of the for the purpose of the part one, it's relatively simple. It's just got that one box checked. And then the part two goes through identifying what the potential impacts might be. And again, you're constrained by the questions they ask you on the form, but there are various different topics regarding environmental impacts. So for instance, on the first page, if you check a box in any one of these categories, yes, then you have to address the next set of questions. So for impact on land, and if you're not sure, you're supposed to say yes. So impact on land, even though it's just the code, buildings could possibly be created because of this change in the code, which would cause alteration of land, physical construction. So we check the box yes. And then you're either able to check no or small, or moderate to large. And basically, we put no to small in all of these, because this form, addresses any possible project that could be anywhere in New York State, nuclear power plant to, a new garden, so it's broad. But basically, to then summarize what we do on this part of the form, you're identifying the moderate to large impacts. Whatever you end up checking moderate to large is really what you're gonna say in your positive declaration, saying, therefore, we feel the significant impacts could be these that we've checked as moderate to large, and that's why we need to do an impact statement, the focus of which will be those potential significant impacts. So, on impact of land, we checked yes. I'll just go through the yeses. Aesthetic, resources, visibility, visual appearance, character, obviously. Historic and archaeological, because you have a lot of historic features here in the hamlet. We checked yes. Impact on transportation, which covers both, parking and pedestrian circulation, and obviously traffic. Energy, we checked yes, again, because just there'll be some level of new development. The same with noise, odor, and light are all lumped together, but there might be new lighting impacts, I suppose, or noise or odor, but we checked yes, but small impacts. And the last two as well, consistency with the community plan is obviously a very large consideration with this proposed action, and consistency with community character.
So Bonnie, if we haven't checked yes on one of these insofar as completing the assessment form, but someone comes forward during the scoping process and says, I have a concern about the impacts on human health because something
Right.
that this board did not consider and that you did not consider,
Right.
is there still an opportunity
Yes.
for that to be considered during the
Yes,
EIS process?
and like I said, you're kind of constrained by the form itself, but the part three in the positive declaration here, that you're putting the reasons, that your initial reasons for what you think the potential impacts are gonna be, that's what this last attachment is. We're allowed to, lay it out a little more clearly, but that doesn't mean that your scope, even our initial scope, includes more detail about what specifically we think should be covered. And at the scoping session, you certainly could add something else. It doesn't matter, you don't ever have to go backwards, and this is supposed to be based on existing information as you know it at this point in time. So, you can definitely add if you want to. So, those are those three, and the other part that you had not seen before is the draft scoping outline. So again, it's like a table of contents. Everything here is, what we considered in our proposal to you that's in the contract, but also then there are other things that we've added that gives a level of detail. So again, this is our first draft of the scope, and not only, will the public be able to add comments at the scoping session, you certainly all as a board or the planning board, anyone who wants to, can give their input. But basically, we described some of the general parameters about an EIS in general, and then went through the description of the proposed action. Obviously, a big part of this is the build-out scenario. We have described the build-out scenario in addition to describing the regulating plan and the regulating code, and the purpose and need, and the involved and interested agencies and approvals. And then it goes through each of the topics with the same basic outline as an impact statement needs to go through, which is existing conditions, anticipated impacts, and mitigation measures. And with the generic, a lot of the mitigation measures will end up being those thresholds that we've talked about. You know, you have a certain amount of sewer capacity, you might have limitations on certain areas for wetland buffers, or the train line, whatever it is, or traffic intersections. So in a generic, that's where you're gonna outline, with this code, the build-out shows that, you know, it's gonna give levels of, I guess thresholds is the best word, for whether it's residential development is constrained by, you know, the amount of sewer capacity. I keep saying the same example, but you know what I mean.
If the environmental,
The environmental constraints, right?
like, for example, and this is gonna be a big one, if the visual impact is
Visual.
determined to be too great, then you may wanna change the code where it recommends, in the two areas it recommends 5 stories, to reduce it to 4 stories, or in a 4-story area, you may wanna reduce the code to reflect a limitation of 3 stories. The EIS will give you the thresholds that you cannot exceed, and your mitigation for meeting those thresholds would be adjustments within the form-based code to meet what the GEIS identified as thresholds. So,
So how do you know if the adjustments that you're gonna make are gonna bring the issues down to that threshold? Like, who's doing that analysis?
Well, that's part of the process, I guess you'd say.
Okay.
You know, we'll go through and analyze it, and then you discuss it, and everyone sort of comes to you balance the pluses and the minuses on all the various different issues. That's really the outcome and the purpose of seeker to begin with, is balancing the impacts,
Right, it's just-
positive and negative.
Right, so this board's decision-making when they're issuing a finding statement based upon the record that's being developed by the consultants with their professional opinions as to traffic and the issues addressed, and then you relying upon those and reaching your subjective opinion as to whether there's a potential significant adverse environmental impact and has it been mitigated. And we're, again, as Supervisor said, just at the beginning of the process, but we'll get to that.
Sure.
Right, because there will be hearing on the draft environmental impact statement, and all of that input will be documented, categorized, and every single one of those comments has to be addressed in the final environmental impact statement. And then that has to be approved by your board and circulated again before the findings can be developed. So there's several more steps.
And so this looks incredibly thorough. And one of the things I'm not terribly good at is reviewing documents on the fly. So I am going to need some time to go through this and review it and digest it. And so I think the recommended next step is going to be for the town board to take this back. And we have a work session scheduled for next Tuesday. And at that time, for the town board to plan to have a robust discussion about this draft outline of the scoping document. Correct.
That works. And so when there is the public scoping session, the public would be looking at the draft scope and any revisions the board makes to it, as well as the underlying zoning code, but it's, because the zoning code would inform the table of contents, as Bonnie mentioned, but it's not a full discussion of the zoning code. That would be premature.
Right, the zoning code will be attached as the action, you know, as if you were doing development plan, you'd attach a concept plan. But it's not, it's a draft as well, so.
And, you know, obviously, we had a discussion earlier tonight, and we reviewed the second draft.
Right.
And we all recognize that based on the conversation that we had, there's going to be a third draft. Do we have a sense of what the time frame looks like for that?
last. I don't know if I could give a date.
A week, I'd
week.
say.
A week.
I'd say a week.
So by the time that the town board sits down to review this outline for the scope, we will also have the latest version of the draft code to be reviewing alongside that.
Possibly.
Possibly.
I would say that I think that that's essential to have if we're going to be able to.
If not, you'll have an indication of what the change is and where the changes, the components. I will commit to attempting to get you that revised third version. A lot of that will depend on coordination with the consultant team to make sure I get what I need from them, to make sure we get a solid draft that's representative of the discussion this evening and the comments that I've received on that second draft in writing. If I cannot have the draft, I will point out for the town board in preparation of your scoping meeting, the areas that are subject to change. You know, tonight we had a very healthy discussion about the form-based code, the idea of, you know, neighbor notification. Those are all very good things that do need to be added to the code. And it will take careful review to determine how best to add them to the code to keep in line with the objectives of creating the form-based code and providing guidance as to what the town wants in the sense of development in the hamlet. So I can commit to at least identify those areas if I do not have that code for you.
And I would keep in mind when looking at the code, not all of the code is the focus of the DEI, of the generic environmental impact statement. For example, the code speaks a lot about the process. That's not gonna result in the environmental impacts, the administrative regulation. The definitions really don't get into it. It's really the regulating plan, as Sabrina and Bonnie have spoken about.
It is the regulating plan and more specifically, the build-out analysis, which under seeker, we must look at the maximum impact. So the build-out analysis will be the maximum development that this code is calling for, and which will then give you an indication of what thresholds you're hitting and what changes you may wanna make to the code to bring it down a notch or to satisfy the perceived impacts, or the studied impacts, I should say.
And you'll remove bowling alley from the
Yes.
possibilities?
No, again, the premise, let's go back to the premise of the form-based code is not to regulate use. It's taking that out of the equation and letting the free market dictate the uses in relation to the guidelines that the form-based code establishes, so that under any use, the community will look and feel the way we want it to.
Although Sabrina, I think we should remove just the words vape shops from there, since we actually legislated that out. I would remove that just so it's not an issue.
We can do that.
Did we legislate it out everywhere now? I mean,
No.
We
No,
have
we're
it
everywhere,
in
but
the
town where it is.
1,000 feet.
Right.
Well, right, but I think where the form-based code is.
Right, but it is allowed in other districts, so we just need to
Correct.
see if it's permitted in the districts that
Right,
are subject to
maybe-
the form-based code, which I think it would not be, but we should compare.
Correct, but it's easy to strike that, again, as the attorney Joel identified, it is a description of the definition. We don't need to include it in the description of the definition of the category.
Does anybody have any additional questions about the EAF?
And the action of the board is,
Look at it.
Yeah, do
Yep,
you
so the
wanna
action-
summarize what we've got before us?
sure, thank you.
I thought you did.
Yeah.
You looked like you wanted to.
He was waiting.
So,
Jill, please via email.
so resolution number,
Excuse me?
You're gonna via email.
Oh, of course.
so resolution number 1 before the board is a resolution to the town board as lead agency pursuant to SECRA in a review of the proposed action to adopt a form-based zoning district for the Chappaqua Hamlet to 1, issue a positive declaration pursuant to SECRA, and 2, schedule a public scoping session for January 28th. So the resolution goes forth and sets forth the predicate language, the legislative authority, what the action the board is taking, and then resolves that 1, the town board adopts the contents of the attached environmental assessment form, EAF parts 2 and 3, which Bonnie and Sabrina spoke to the board about tonight. as well as the attached positive declaration form, which is the attachment A to the EAF. Second, that the town board determines that the proposed action may have potential significant adverse environmental impacts and determines that to adopt the secret positive declaration and that a draft generic environmental impact statement be prepared. And third, authorizing the supervisor to sign the determination of significance. And fourth, directing staff to circulate the positive declaration form, the draft scope, and the local law, as well as make copies of the draft scope available to the public, as well as to be circulated to the interested agencies. As Bonnie mentioned, there are no other involved agencies, only the town board has the legislative discretion, but there are a number of interested agencies, planning board, zoning board, and other regulatory agencies. And then that the town board will hold a scoping session to review the draft scope on January 28th at 7 p.m., or when reached on the agenda, and shall accept written comments on the draft scope until 4 p.m. on February 7th, unless further extended by the town board. So secret requires that you, if you're gonna hold a session, that you also allow for receipt of written comments for those who can't make it. And so the language here says they'll have until February 7th, and this board has the discretion to extend that time should it be necessary to provide further written comment.
I feel like it would be really helpful when folks come to the scoping session, actually, and those who are planning on speaking. Is it possible to ask them to also submit written comments? Can they do both? It's just so much easier to digest and respond to and incorporate written comments.
You mean like the cards?
Yeah, we could do cards.
Okay.
They can't, obviously not required to, but they can, and that would,
Okay.
that
It's
would
just
help make it
helpful.
easier for Bonnie and Sabrina when they're then taking those comments and making modifications to the
Right.
scope if it were in writing.
And does number 5, does that give us leeway if we decide that we don't want to close the public hearing and we wanted to have another session, it would still allow us to do that?
Exactly. The law requires that we just notice the public session. It's not a public hearing per se, because there are different requirements for
Right.
noticing. It's a public meeting session. But yes, once you've noticed it, you complied with the law, you have the ability to extend it. Okay.
All right.
And we could do that determination actually at the 28th, because we've got the meeting of the 4th in between, so
Right.
it still actually works for us.
Okay. So moved.
That was easy enough.
Second.
All right.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Lauren, you want to go?
All right, so you can jump off now.
Okay,
Number 2.
number 2, payment of claims. I move to approve the payment of claims in the amount of $875,302.10, listed on the summary pre-check writing report and detailed voucher detail reports, all dated January 14th, 2020. Checks will be issued and mailed to each claimant listed on Wednesday, January 15th, 2020.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. I move to accept the following monthly reports for December 2019. Town clerk, court clerk, development department, and receiver taxes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. I move to authorize the town supervisor to enter into a service agreement with Goosetown Communications in accordance with the agreement dated December 10th, 2019, $3,540.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. I move to authorize the town supervisor to execute the 2020 interagency agreement with the Northeast Westchester Special Recreation Incorporated. Along with neighboring municipalities, this agreement provides a collective program of therapeutic recreation services for individuals with disabilities residing or domiciled in our area. For 2020, the town of Newcastle's municipal match contribution is $13,810.53 to provide these services to 30, is it 35 or 32? Because it's two different numbers. It's interesting that happened.
More than 30.
You know what, I would say 35, just because if it's 32, it's fine. We're-
Okay,
yeah.
35 Newcastle residents. The annual contribution is reflected below.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. I move to approve an expenditure for the Newcastle United for Youth for $4,925.90 to International Survey Associates for an online survey in accordance with the quote dated December 10th, 2019.
Second.
All in favor?
Whereas the Newcastle Stanwood Consolidated Water District provides water to properties located as both inside and outside of the town of Newcastle. Where did it go? I'm sorry.
Next week.
I know, but it was.
It's like
well,
upside
it's
down.
upside down. Whereas as follows, and now therefore be it further resolved, that the town board of the town of Newcastle, on behalf of the Newcastle Townwide Consolidated Water District, hereby directs the town controller to send a copy of this resolution to the indicated location. Be it further resolved, the town board hereby petitions the county of Westchester to levy unpaid water charges due to Newcastle Townwide Consolidated Water District for the particular address listed here, and the parcel is listed here in the amount of $10,428.78.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I move to approve rehiring Courtney Spaeth as a seasonal part-time student intern in the court office at the hourly rate of $14 effective December 17th, 2019.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I move to authorize the hiring of Jordan Foley to the position of fourth grade police officer within the town of Newcastle Police Department at an annual salary of $71,931.60. The appointment date will be January 27th, 2020, pending successful completion of the medical psych evaluation.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
So just
All in
statement.
favor?
Okay.
Aye.
Aye.